I want to begin here just with a brief introduction. And so I think I just want you to say your name and where you're from, and then I will ask questions that will dive a little more deeply, and in no way is this allowing me to pull up my questions on my phone at the last minute. Why don't we start with Dawn?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Chapman. I am co-founder of a group called Just Moms STL St. Louis from St. Louis, Missouri. My other co-founder, Karen Nickel, is here, and I am a mom of a very sick little boy and a very sick husband. We're poisoned with waste from the Manhattan Project.
Okay. Alex?
I'm Alex Ruiz. I'm a co-founder of the Torchlight initiative, which represents a disproportionate amount of U.S. Air Force members working in and around the ICBM mission area who have cancer.
All right. Sébastien.
Sébastien Philippe. I'm a research scholar at Princeton University. I work on the human and environmental impact of nuclear weapons testing and programs. Okay.
And the microphone, you have to just like eat it. So you have to really be on top of it. Okay. Okay. And Dawn, you didn't know I was going to do this, but we gave you slides because your panelists also wanted slides, so we've given them to you whether you want them or not. So, Andy, can we have the first slide, please? Nope. Well, while we are doing this, Dawn, why don't you just tell us your, I guess, origin story and how you got involved with this issue?
Do you want me to wait and see if it comes up first?
You see how I'm buying time?
I can jump right in.
Yeah.
So, as I said, I am the mom of a very sick little boy who I believe is sick from exposure to Manhattan Project waste that is in my community, unbeknownst to me when I moved in it. And so I believe I was pregnant with him when that exposure occurred. And it's important to note that all of his lengthy doctors and specialists agree as well that that is pretty much the cause. And my co-founder Karen Nickel and I were two moms, and she was poisoned as a little girl. The creek that she grew up in also had radioactive waste in it, unbeknownst to her then. And so a lot of what St. Louis did in our processing of radioactive waste for the dawn of the atomic age, the Manhattan Project, was kept secret from all of us. And so we didn't learn about it until the site that sits 2 miles from my house, which again has Manhattan Project waste sitting on the surface, not cleaned up, caught fire. And we could smell emissions. And that led the entire St. Louis region to uncover all these different sites within several miles of each other that had this same radioactive waste. So our group started in 2013, and we have been fighting like crazy ever since to, reduce as much risk by cleaning up what we can, but also by trying to expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to cover communities across the United States, such as ours.
And it's worth noting that Reuters just did a huge piece, a generational piece. So if you have not seen this, it's amazing. It's this multimedia, sort of interactive piece of investigation that is, it just covers the health impacts from 80 years ago. So again, this is the Manhattan Project, responsible for the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they are still dealing with the impacts. Dawn, I also just wanted to ask, so why are you in D.C.? What are you doing here?
Karen and myself, along with Mary Dixon from Utah, who is also a downwinder, we are all fighting desperately to not just extend, but expand what is known as the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. We call it RECA, which is a piece of legislation from the 1990s that desperately needed to be expanded then, but now has expired. And what it does is it compensates people like ourselves that have been exposed through nuclear fallout or processing. We have minors as well that are included in the program that were forgotten about, that it doesn't just compensate us, it also provides screenings. There are grants within the program that can be set up within our communities to help educate and do advocacy work at preventing exposures in known areas. So it's a critical piece of legislation, and I don't have to tell anybody in this room how difficult it is to navigate DC. We're probably trip number 10 trying to get this done, and we have about, next week will be our last week to accomplish this in this fiscal session.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to come back. We're going to talk to this. So this is Alex Ruiz, and Alex, you are from Torchlight, and I wanted to, before we get into the whole thing, highlight other reporting, because we have reporters here, and in fact, we have Thomas Novelli from military.com. There he is over there. This is his story, and we are jumping the gun a little bit, but now we are going to say, Alex, why are you here? Tell us about the Torchlight Initiative.
Well, let's see. I myself am a former Air Force officer and what we call a missileer, or an officer that would look over the Minuteman III ICBM system. I served at Malmstrom Air Base up in Montana from about 2003 to about 2010. As it turns out, years later, a growing group of folks that I worked with have had an unusually very high incidence of cancers, specifically non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I got a phone call from a friend who knows of my cancer history. I, as well, had cancer years ago. Don't necessarily consider it directly connected to the case, but they wanted to know how to navigate, the VA, basically, and claims systems. Then we started to realize back in 2022, 2023 timeframe, there's an awful lot of folks, 18, in fact, folks with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, in a small concentration, of overlap of service at Malmstrom in Montana. So we've been working hard to try to take that qualitative introduction to that data and turn it into something rigorous so we can help get the Air Force to drive conclusive studies to understand what's causing it.
Mm-hmm. And this has a really interesting arc, and again, you have slides, and we'll come back to them after we cycle to Sébastien here. But the reporting on this has been really, really interesting, because the AP covered this for a while, and then basically the military said, oh, none of these cases are linked. But it took somebody internal. Can you tell folks about that?
I can. And so, yeah, thank you, Tom, in fact, because your reporting helped trigger those national outlets to take interest. And we've had some meaningful discussions with other journalists. I'm here specifically to broaden that kind of reach. And so hopefully I get to make some introductions to folks before I leave. But yes, that's true. I think there have been concerns over cancer causing, carcinogen exposures, et cetera, with this line of work in years past, and studies that were produced by the Air Force, which were really kind of proclaimed to be inconclusive. I'll even tell you that the commanding general for the command that oversees this mission area finds that previous research was woefully unsatisfactory, right? And so he remains hopeful that we're journeying through better methodologies. We intend to help him, in fact, with our initiative, a grassroots initiative, and collect data outside the government so that we can help drive that accountability, share it with the academic community, with researchers, scrub on the methodology so that there's no second guessing on whether or not the studies are conclusive.
Yeah, but the thing I wanted to drive it is it took a missileer circulating a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. That's right.
After multiple media outlets were told, no, inconclusive, and then it started to gain traction. So a really, really interesting history. And again, I'm going to come back again. Sébastien, you have, and Andy, I'm jumping around, Andy. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and the Missiles on Our Land project?
Yes. So at Princeton about 5 years ago, we started a kind of a new area of work, and the idea was not just to try to do research and get it published academically and hopefully perhaps covered in the media. but it was actually to build a long-term project, co-working project with media outlet, and with a focus on first investigative media. Sorry, yeah.
There we go.
So, my friend Thomas Status was here. We'll come later and talk more about this. But so we've been running projects now the past 4 years, where for 1 or 2 years we work with a newsroom very closely, and we do modeling about the health impact of past accidents, radiological accidents, consequences of nuclear testing in this country, in other countries. We do also a model of potential accidents at nuclear facilities, or we model nuclear war, the consequences of nuclear war on people and planet. And so one of that project called Missiles on Our Land looked at actually the modernization of ICBMs and how that modernization was presented to local communities who were living with missile silos on their land. And in particular, there was one member of our team was from the Mandan-Nenatsa and Arikara tribes of North Dakota, which is the only federally recognized tribal land in the U.S. that hosts nuclear weapons on their land. And this was kind of one of the key entry points in this project, to understand how the Air Force presented this project of keeping those missiles there for over 60 years to the community.
And for this community of reporters, and again, everybody here, that we have health reporters, we have tech reporters, we have national security reporters, climate reporters, but I don't think everybody here realizes that, we're in the middle of modernization. A lot of these states are getting new ICBMs, new silos. North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana. There's going to be help from Utah and Arizona. So this is part of this debate. And so I wanted to come back and ask Dawn, and then we'll hand over some slides. So how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this modernization effort? You can really talk into the microphone. Really, there we go.
Can I be honest? Right. You want me to be honest?
We brought you here to be honest.
I mean, look, the Manhattan Project is in our community still. So nobody's figured out in our community, 70 plus years, how the heck to clean this stuff up. I mean, literally the best engineers in the world are looking at sites that are 2 miles from my backyard. Some have it in their backyard. Some houses are on top of it, and they don't know how to clean it up. So what makes me concerned is that, you want to call it modernization or whatever, when accidents happen, when things go wrong, how are they going to fix it, and where are they going to put the waste? And who else's backyard is going to volunteer to have this waste put in it? And I think the last part is that the production of this, our community is sick from the production. So, our uranium went into Trinity, went directly into the Trinity bomb. It went to Hanford first, was turned into plutonium, then put in. My son is sick from the very first waste ever created that Enrico Fermi enriched under the University of Chicago. Even if Trinity would not have been detonated, even if the bombs would not have been created, our community would still be sick and dying. So that's my concern, is they have yet to demonstrate that when things go terribly wrong, they either know how to clean it or have the will to clean it. And frankly, all these other sites, like the professor's talking about, that's heartbreaking, and what they've done to the military. Compensate the people and help the people that have already been harmed, and demonstrate goodwill. And then we'll have that conversation.
Thank you so much. So, Alex, I want to have a point of clarification here, and then I want to turn it over to you because you have some slides you want us to look at. So, Andy, if we could cue those up, that would be great. But the cancers not linked to radiation from the missiles themselves. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'm just going to, again, turn this over to you.
Sure. Yeah, right. So, and by the way, I wholeheartedly agree. It's tough. Modernizing these weapons is not something we should all want to celebrate and go off and choose to do. We're caught in the constraints of an awful problem that we have to figure it out, and we also have to hold our government accountable so that they get this stuff done using modern technologies and capabilities. Decades past has proven that it didn't go so well. In our case, that's correct. We don't do our work in proximity of the warheads, for example. Those are miles away from the launch control centers that we would inhabit doing our work. The only evidence that we have so far is certain kinds of chemicals, PCBs, for example, that either outgas or you come in contact with are causing exposures that are triggering, in particular, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's very inconclusive, and I'm not a medically trained professional. This is just what the exploration of the data has shown us so far, working with some academic partners.
And it would not have passed like an OSHA work site review.
Well, that's the thing. The data provenance, the history is murky, right? So in recent years, with standards improving, maybe yes, they would. In fact, in current kind of circumstances, a look at the environment is not going to be as helpful as being able to kind of go back in time and understand what the exposures were when the standards weren't the same, or what new standards were made or whatnot. So we're kind of chasing a ghost to try to look at what happened to this obvious exposure that's caused an awful lot of cancer in people that are my age, 44 years old or so.
And so I wanted to ask, how do you and your organization intend to add value? And I think you have answers through some slides. So I'm going to let you go.
Sure. Let's see here. First off, this is what we're talking about. So we created a registry and asking people to self-report their cancer cases. It came about because friends of ours started to communicate with each other and say, hey, I have cancer. Hey, I have cancer. Oh my God, why do you have cancer too? I mean, by show of hands, does anybody out here know anybody with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma? Okay. Do you know 2 people? Do you know 3? Do you know 4? Do you know 18? Okay. That's the kind of thing that causes us to stay committed to understanding that something's wrong here. 18 people, most of which are in their mid-40s, doesn't square with the national average. Research showing that 100,000 people would reveal 27 folks, right, in that given population sample, right? We're talking about 660 people over the course of, less than 10 years of folks that would have worked together. In fact, I'll show you some of their faces here. These folks, and there are others, they would have worked together. They would have seen each other in a given work week. They would have had coffee together. They would have sat in on briefings together. And now they're all talking about how to strategize and save themselves against specifically non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's other cancers out there. Like I said, 700 cases. I'm just talking about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and 18 people who worked together over the course of 2004 to 2007 specifically. So it's a considerable high concentration of something very problematic. We're just on the hunt to try to get the story right so that it's less stuck in kind of the qualitative emotional realm. We're working with partners to make it an academic, hard to refute kind of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's sufficient, Robert?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And Sébastien, I wanted to next talk about you and your slides. And again, you work with a lot of these communities, and I'm also interested about, what goes either unreported or what do you think is not mainstream? This is where you work with these communities, you work on these projects, and then I'm going to hand it over to you because you have slides.
Thank you so much. I guess let me give you an example, which is the first set of slides, just 3 slides. So we've had this Radiation Exposure Compensation Act that is supposed to compensate people who were exposed in the United States from radiation produced by nuclear testing in Nevada and New Mexico. And the New Mexico folks were exposed, many of them, to fallout from the Trinity test. And so I'm a scientist by training, and was a case of we have very few data about this test and the population that were exposed. But today, with really bigger computers, models of the atmosphere and nuclear testing, we could finally, for the first time, and that was 2023, for the first time we modeled the fallout of the Trinity test, across the entire country. And not only did we do that, we modeled the fallout from all the other atmospheric tests that were conducted in Nevada. And for the first time, that allowed us to try to understand what were the communities that were most impacted in the country by nuclear testing, and to kind of try to help fill the gap with the very limited set of data that existed from legacy data from the Department of Energy. And this morning, I was with Don, and we're looking at this map, and people are now using it to try to set and think about how we should expand coverage for that legislation. But so that's one aspect of communities that are impacted, and how and what you can do to support and shed light on their experience is verify and model whether what their testimony is actually very likely happen, and that's how we think about these things. But then we're also in the middle of this big modernization, and we still are dealing with legacy nuclear waste and communities impacted, but we are restarting building nuclear weapons parts. We are on the verge of building new nuclear weapons, fielding new nuclear weapons around the countries. And of course, given that history, we are expecting that there will be some issues and new communities that will be impacted in the future. What is different between now, right, and the buildup in the 50s and 60s is, for example, in this country, the National Environmental Protection Act, where the government literally has to give you and give communities that are welcoming those weapon systems or those new nuclear weapons factories, they have to give and show what are the environmental and human impact on those communities, the potential for accidents. And so what we're doing now is essentially peer reviewing those government studies and remodeling the potential accidents that are not necessarily included in existing stories. And this was the Missile on Our Land, was the Air Force publishing a 2,000-page report on the environmental impact of this new ICBM that they're planning to field now, saying that this was the largest environmental impact study in the history of NEPA in this country, so really big claim. And that study, there is like one sentence in those 2,000 pages that says, well, this does not involve radiological materials, so there cannot be any radiological impact from that modernization program.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions, and it's for everybody. So, one of the things that we're talking about is not only modernization, but the next presidential administration has talked about not just new nuclear testing, but new explosive nuclear testing, restarting that. So I just wanted to get reactions. Anybody go at any time you want.
I can go very quickly.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I mean, there are a million reasons from a national security point of view why you would probably do not want to do that. But I would not be surprised for it to happen, and perhaps as soon as next year. There's been a long debate whether our scientific understanding of how nuclear weapons are working, even the weapons that have been built, 30 years ago or so. And I've seen people in the previous Trump administration essentially saying, well, we don't know if the weapon will detonate, so we need to do new nuclear tests. So I expect this debate to come back, of course. But what is interesting now, I think this time, having worked on all this nuclear testing issues, is that those nuclear tests, even if they happen on the ground, sometimes they do leak, right? And so there will be xenon, iodine, that will be leaking from Nevada. And we now have the tools, the scientific community, openly to actually model that. People in Nevada could have detectors in their backyard and actually have their own data and monitoring. So it's not like they will be able to do all of this in secret. And if there's a mishap or communities that get impacted, I think there will be also major political and policy issues coming up. So I'm afraid that it's could really happen, but at the same time, I think communities that have experienced nuclear testing in the past are really cognizant of the potential impact, and hopefully they will organized against, the resumption of testing. Yeah.
Who else?
I mean, you're essentially asking me if I want my kid who's likely to at some point die young from his illness because he was exposed to radiation to get more radiation. I mean, that's basically what that would mean, and, even if you consider underground, it being a mom, just a mom, not a scientist who lives with, and sees the devastating impact of this. And obviously you pointed out our news story, which the journalist who did that did such a great job keeping track of the illnesses and making the point for us, putting data to our personal testimonies. I just think it's an awfully big risk. And I think it really breaks my heart to think of another community or another mom that would ever go through this again. And so, and in order to, I think, persuade ordinary people like myself and my community members, even our friends over here in the corner from Rocky Flats, who are living the same thing St. Louis is living, it's going to take a lot to I think convince the communities that have already been impacted. And I don't think you'll ever make them comfortable with it. I don't think you'll ever convince us that they would ever put our lives above, anything else.
Alex, you want to respond, or do you want me to move on?
All I would say is I think no matter what we do, it's coming. We live in this post-Bretton Woods world order that's changing. Mm-hmm. And so competition is becoming fiercer, and the world order it's evolving or devolving, however you want to kind of phrase it. And I think that much to the point that you put out on your website, the balance of trying to get information out and to push awareness in competition with a constantly frenetic news cycle, and also not jump to the emotional panic state, it's going to be something that so many people in this room, it looks like, are going to have their work cut out for them. That's what I think.
And so, again, I have one more collective question, and it's a follow-on. And then, so, Don is here talking to Congress. And so for the folks that you recommend, or you represent, for the afflicted, the bereaved, what do you want to say to policymakers, those in power, the incoming president? What would you like to say?
So, and to your point, when we're talking about the balance, there is a lot of harm that was done decades ago that needs to be resolved. It needs to be answered, acknowledged, and people need to be compensated for it. And there are still sites like ours, like at Rocky Flats. They don't even have signs at Rocky Flats. So
and tell people where Rocky Flats is.
Rocky Flats is right outside of Denver, Colorado, and it was a plutonium processing plant. And so there are some very basic things. We just got signs along Coldwater Creek, a creek that has radioactive waste in it in people's backyards today, as a matter of fact. So I think there are some things that they are going to have to do in order to open the conversation. And a special thanks to Sébastien for coming with us this morning. The advocacy and the combination of that with the data should be enough at this point in time to push these people, whatever they think of the new testing or the new modernization. It should be enough to say, hey, right now what we need to focus on first is let's go into these communities and let's remove this if we can. And you know what? Let's figure out once and for all, let's solve the problem. Where are we going to put the waste? Where are we going to put this stuff that it's not going to harm another community? Because I can't see how you can go into anything without having solved that first.
Alex.
Well, I would say, the change in a political administration is a direct challenge to us, because until we have something that's kind of has its firmaments in scientific backing, which we're working hard at with partners, it comes down to the unilateral capabilities of senior leaders and decision makers, some of which are politically appointed. So will the next Secretary of the Air Force care enough about this issue We already lost Senator John Tester in the election, who was an ally of ours that would have really been a lot of help, I think, in getting our voice out there and helping us conclude the kind of argument that we need. So we've got some reboot to do to try to figure out how to appeal to folks on the Hill and get in line, because we're not the only ones out there. There's burn pit exposures, and there's other fighter pilots who've had incidences like this. We're learning and taking pages from their books, but it's going to be a journey.
Mm-hmm. So, Sébastien, I'll ask you the same thing. And then I want to ask you directly, Sébastien, a follow-on question that is the Rocky Flats question. So we know about Edgerton, St. Louis. We know about Rocky Flats. What are the other either challenged communities or challenged issues that maybe not enough people know about?
Yeah, so if you build the map of the United States where all the facilities were involved into nuclear weapons manufacturing have been placed, there are similar stories everywhere. And some have had more chance of getting media exposure, some actually almost nothing.
Mm-hmm. And again, give us places.
Well, I mean, actually, it's funny you were talking Rocky Flat. Rocky Flat had significant, explainer, but there are still questions, there's still data that has never really been made public or that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's either the places people don't necessarily know, or they still can't really answer those questions. I don't know if that's clear. And so you were talking about Rocky Flat this summer. I had a student who, it's a facility that was jointly raided by the FBI and the EPA, and that was closed after that for environmental violations. And there was multiple fires, plutonium fires, happening at the facility that released plutonium in the surrounding communities. And we modeled this for the first time to try to understand actually which communities were impacted at the time. So that type of work and investigation is open everywhere, and then you should look at the places where nuclear weapons are going to be rebuilt, or the places that are being reactivated, or and so on, and not only think about potential impact on the communities that are hosting these places, but also on the workers and everybody that is taking part in that enterprise, because they will be, unfortunately, health impact for everybody.
Yeah, there's also this interesting thing, and I know we had the climate panel this morning, but there are really interesting climate challenges, because in the last year you had not only Los Alamos threatened by a forest fire, but the Pentax plant outside of Amarillo, Texas, also threatened by a forest fire. So it's it's a more complex issue now.
And if I may, just one thing is, usually we look at those problems community by community, and there hasn't been any kind of overall understanding of the full impact of everything that happened so far and everything that is planned to happen over the next 60 years, because this is what we're talking about. We're essentially planning the nuclear modernization, having those new weapons for the next 60 years. And so even that planning forward in terms of community impacted, expectations in terms of workers impacted and whatnot, none of this has been done by anyone at this point.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left, which I think, oh boy, the hands rocketed up. Look at that. Can we, and again, you'll have the chance to talk to everybody here at Roundtables, but can we get a mic in the audience, please? And Andy, this young lady right here almost broke her arm. Like,
There you go. Thank you. I actually am an impacted community member. I'm a victim of nuclear testing, as was my family, my neighborhood, my entire state. And
tell us who you are.
I'm
tell us your
Mary
state.
Dixon from Salt Lake City. But when you look at everyone impacted all along the nuclear chain, from production to manufacturing, to the testing, to the storage, and now talking about building up our arsenals, all along those lines, there are going to be more people who are impacted. And I think as we look at everything, and as scientists look at everything, do not leave out the human element of this because we are still living with it. You both are living with it. I'm living with it. I'm seeing it in future generations, nieces who are getting cancer now that was, I mean, it's tragic when you look at what these weapons have done to the human beings. And when I think about it, no other country bombed me, my family, created the waste that these women are living with. My own country bombed me. I mean, there were 100 above ground tests, 928 underground. They all had impacts on very real people. I mean, look at Sébastien's map. Look at this. Up into Canada. I mean, to me, it's actually heartbreaking. So I just hope you all, as you write about this, think about this, remember the human beings who are real people who are affected. Off the soapbox now.
And I also wanted to point out that Dawn's co-founder, Karen Nickel, is here with us as well. And she will be sitting with Dawn. And I'm going to guess that Mary Dixon will also be at that table. So if you want to hear more, yes, sir.
Just a quick question. We shouldn't be too parochial about this. Let's not forget the Pacific Islands.
That's right.
And I just discovered that about half of the plutonium in the Nagasaki bomb came from Radium Canada. And a book, the Dene people up there actually carried sacks of uranium on their backs out of the mines. And in 1998, they went to Nagasaki and apologized on behalf of their land. And there's a movie out there that you can Google called A Village of Victims, Widows, a village of widows that I recommend to you.
All right, thank you so much. We have time for one more question.
Well, speaking of testing in other places, also, this is specifically for Sébastien, but you flashed, some of your research here and earlier from the Nevada test site modeling. I'm wondering if you're planning to expand that research on other test sites, particularly the Pacific Proving Grounds. I think that's most relevant to U.S. history, but there's tons of that globally, and so I'm wondering. And I guess this also goes for if that's for you specifically, but for the other panelists. If part of your advocacy now or eventually might reach beyond the United States, beyond domestic.
She's asking if you're going to sleep ever again.
No, yeah. So it's 528 atmospheric nuclear tests. I think I have no model like 110 of them or something like this. So there's still like 400 to go. There've been specific demands from communities in the Pacific Islands, in Australia, and I'm very interested about doing the modeling in China also because there's very little data there. So the answer is yes. I will work on this, but I'm trying to find other researchers to support that type of research as well, so we can divide and conquer and not just rely on me at this point. Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's put your hands together. Thank you so much.